And today we're diving into the world of deep fakes. Is it true that you started your ethics journey by programming your coffee machine to refuse service anyone who hasn't said please?
Since we're talking about reality, it's not true. The furthest example I can come up with is, of course, the story of Adam and Eve. So fact number one is that a lot of content on the internet is now produced by large language models, chatbots of various sorts. All of this content out there, which is billions and billions of pages, and I think it's only a matter of time, if it's not already past, that the synthetic content outgrows the content produced by humans. Can we increase human happiness overall with deepfakes? Yeah, I can see that in some entertainment setting where you see extremely realistic depictions of Einstein or some figure, and we can really relate to them. I think the risks from deepfakes are definitely real.
Deepfakes are just digital makeup. Truth always finds a way. So what's your take, Laurynas, on that?
For sure, this is relevant for everyone. The risks I just mentioned, the scenarios they can happen to anybody, really.
Hello and welcome to the AI Ethics Insider series. I'm your host, Tim Kogan, a co-founder of the Israeli Association for Ethics in AI. And today we're diving into the world of deep fakes. In this episode, The Reality Distorted, uncovering the truth about deepfakes, will explore implications of AI-generated media on our perception of reality. And joining me today, it's our honor, is Dr. Laurynas Adomaitis, an AI ethics researcher at French Atomic Energy Commission, senior lecturer on data ethics at emlyon Business School, visiting lecturer at Paris Tech, and member of our Association Scientific Council. Hi, Laurynas. How are you today?
Hi, Tim. I'm okay. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Laurynas, we met when you were joining the Scientific Council of our association, and it was a huge privilege for us as you're one of the most renowned personalities in the AI ethics space. So I was wondering, is it true that you started your ethics journey by programming your coffee machine to refuse service anyone who hasn't said please?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm the most renowned personality, but here I am, and I'll say one thing, that since we're talking about reality, it's not true. I didn't program a coffee machine to say any of these things. That's not how I started. Well, I get your joke. It's a joke. Well, I'll tell you it's not true, because we are keeping a thin line between truth and not truth in this talk. We're talking about deepfakes. But there is a sense in which this is not true, but right. There is a distinction between what's true and what's right. And getting a machine to demand some dignity, to demand that it be treated with dignity, I think it's not a terrible idea, because it builds a good behavior pattern. Some would argue it's a form of nudging, making people act nicely.
Yeah, might be our future. Before we dive into the tech talk, let's start with a twist. If you could point out the one most important deepfake in human history, which one would it be and why?
Going back in history, I would say the furthest example I can come up with is, of course, the story of Adam and Eve. Because we know Eve spoke with someone who told her that eating this fruit is okay, the forbidden fruit. You can imagine it as a snake or whatever image, if it even needs an image. But we know they spoke. We know words came from somewhere. And now these words, what are they? What is the status of these words, that it's okay to eat the forbidden fruit. Because to me, it looks like they're obviously not coming from another person. There were only two people in the whole world. There was Adam and Eve. And this is something third, something else that is not human, but it's speaking with Eve and they're communicating. To me, that is deepfake. To me, this non-human agent that is able to speak with us as if it was human, pretending to be human, I think that's deepfake, and that's as far as I can go in history, beginning of humanity.
Wow. This example is spot on and a little bit shocking, to be honest. Never looked at this from this perspective. But still, and building on it, let's imagine a world where AI-generated propaganda goes viral, when manipulating public opinion is just happening on a global scale. And could you please paint us this picture, Laurynas? How might these technologies be weaponized either by state or non-state actors?
So I think it has happened already, kind of in recent years even. I think even some of the first deepfakes were made of presidents, Ukraine's president, Russia's president. It's quite a juicy target because obviously the most straightforward way we can see this is let's pretend a big world leader comes up and says something that they didn't say. Because of course the word of a leader means more than basically a word of anyone. So, nobody listens what the Queen of England says, but everybody listens to what Joe Biden says. So this is why I think people even start to test these deepfakes or to test their abilities by imitating political figures. But not necessarily. We've seen some images, fabricated war images, all kinds of stuff happening recently. But that's, I think, a most direct and straightforward application of deepfakes to kind of our social and political world. But I think there is a much more nuanced sense in which deepfakes have entered the discourse and public opinion and are influencing public opinion. So fact number one is that a lot of content on the internet is now produced by large language models, chatbots of various sorts. And we know that
already. You mean already?
Because it's such a cheap way to produce content, and producing content historically has been beneficial for sales. So people do a lot of that to increase the standings in search engines of their products and so on. And the internet is now flooded with this machine-produced language. We know that from subtle messages that appear there. For example, there are expressions that language models like to use. For example, that a tapestry of intricate something. These words that we never use in natural language, for some reason they love it. And even if I have it in my system prompts for ChatGPT, even if you tell them directly, never use these expressions, they continue to use them. So if you go on Ngram or some kind of web analytics tool, you'll see that the usage of these expressions has gone exponentially up since 2020 or something like that, when large language models became common. So we know there is a flood of these of this content. So that's fact number one. Fact number two, large language models learn of data sets of human language, and we know human language is not ideologically neutral. So we know that when we say something, when we argue on the internet, when we write forum posts, we're not ideologically neutral. We have a position. And even though the chatbot itself doesn't have a position, it is non-human subject, doesn't have opinions or any semantics, right? So it's everything we project onto them. But by learning the human language, it also imports a certain ideological stance. And of course, companies also do some fine tuning and they play with these political views or ask the chatbot to never speak about politics. But what is everything is politics. So the language that they use is also kind of filled with that ideology. And there is no way to take it out because that's human language. That's how it works. And all of this content out there, which is billions and billions of pages, and I think it's only a matter of time, if it's not already past, that the synthetic content outgrows the content produced by humans. And that had an ideological weight to it. And I think that can influence us in a very more indirect way. And now if you add a third layer, which is the hordes and hordes of personal data that companies and analytic companies have from social media, that can give you a recipe for very targeted, precise, automated campaigns that can be really successful politically. So we know that there were campaigns based on these kind of personal data. We know Cambridge Analytica and all that scandal, but that there is one difference: that could not be automated. That people needed to sit down and craft these, messages, how to attract, how to sway the opinion. And now that can also be automated. So it's really low cost, very efficient method that can really disrupt the democratic process.
I fully understand that, and I understand that it's coming from data that all these models are trained with, because all the data is basically generated by humans. And as you just said, humans are naturally ideologically biased in some way, simply because of the context they live in, surroundings and society, etc. So and so does it mean that we already live basically in a world of AI generated content, search engine optimization, information, etc., manipulates us and our online behavior?
Yes, absolutely. We live in this world. I don't know if I would call it, strictly speaking, manipulation, because if we define it, or if we look into the definition a little more, looks like manipulation requires lying. So, of course, there is some kind of pretense that when a chatbot talks to you, it pretends to be a human, so it's sort of a lie, and then but we go with that lie because we want the service. And that's why we use it, because it's funny how they talk like humans. That's why we want it. But I don't think it necessarily has this intention of deceiving us. However, it can be certainly used by humans who have an intention to deceive other humans. That for sure can happen. I don't know if it has already happened, but I see the potential, and I wouldn't be surprised that it's already happened.
There are many other opinions out there, of course. Some say that deepfakes are just a modern twist on old propaganda and promotion tricks. And could you convince us, why should we be more worried about AI-generated deepfakes than, say, images manipulation with Photoshop, which has been around for decades?
Yeah, I think it ties back to what we just spoke about. And I think the two main differences, the two big themes here are scale. One is scale, because as I mentioned, this can be completely automated. I think for the new models that OpenAI and Google just announced, you pay something like 20 or 35 US cents for 1 million tokens. For 1 million tokens, which is like 500,000 words or something. So that costs 25 cents to produce, and it can be targeted. It's not random text, so you ask what you want. So you see how scale can really increase with the use of chatbots. Also images, to Photoshop one image, it would take, 5 years ago, it would take a long time. And now what it takes is just a prompt that needs to, of course, be cleverly written. But with that prompt, you can produce as many images, different ones that you can use. So scale is number one. And issue number two with this deepfake era propaganda is individualization. So you can personalize these messages that you craft, personalize to each target or target group. And that is enabled, of course, by, again, personal data collecting on social media platforms, all kinds of platforms. Of course, you can extrapolate even from your shopping history, what sorts of things you like what kind of books you buy and stuff like that. So we have become very smart on how we use our data to determine the profiles of people. We call it profiling. And once you have a profile, it's very easy to adopt the messages you want to say, to send, to make them really efficient. So these two things, scale and personalization. However, I wouldn't say it's kind of really different from old school propaganda. In one way, they're pretty similar, namely that I think it takes the same measures to be resilient. In a way, you can try to find a technological solution, but that's a cat and mouse game. As all the kinds of detectors become better, the generators become also better to avoid the detection, and it's back and forth. But one element that is always constant is humans. So as humans, we can be resilient to misinformation, to kind of information bubbles and all kinds of things. It's like in security, we have such complicated hacks and so high-level attack matrices that we can use to infiltrate and defeat systems. But experience shows the most vulnerable element is always the human element. Somebody just has a weak password or tells you the password, or you call them and they just let you in. So that's what it is here as well. I think the human element is the weak link in any case, and that's what can I think be the answer to it. It's a human resilience to this type of information.
What you're saying about personalization at scale is really fascinating because it resonates with basically ABC of any business. And there is like a typical example of every MBA class of Amazon who achieved their success to significant extent thanks to their lasting effort to generate emails to their customers that would be on one hand at scale, on the other hand personalized. And it was achieved through human effort. Of course, many people were, drafting those emails, finding ways to adjust those emails to specific people, understanding their profile. But what we get now is that we can achieve that at a way lower price and faster, and basically change the overall perception and promotion landscape and propaganda landscape. All right. So I suggest to move on and have a quick fire round. I'll name a measure big tech players are taking against deepfakes, and you'll hit us with your hot take. Effective or not? Elaborate as much as you wish.
On some scale, okay.
On some scale, of course. So here we go. The first, Microsoft's deepfake detection algorithm identifying and flagging deepfake content.
I would say not enough. And from what I've seen, doesn't work well, needs to be constantly updated, and will certainly be outpaced because it pays more to make algorithms that produce the images than, to detect. Detect is not profitable.
All right, moving on. Adobe's media authenticity infrastructure, which verifies the region and authenticity of digital media.
I don't know the full details of how it works, but the region thing sounds to me like it can be played with enough phone numbers and IP addresses and all sorts of things that you can easily source digitally. So I would need to see how well it does against a smart attacker that knows what they're doing. So, not a black box attack.
All right, moving on. Meta's deepfake detection challenge dataset, which is used for training and testing deepfake detection models.
That I would say is good, but it's a data set that, you know, in itself doesn't do anything. So it's good that we have it, and I assume it's open access. That should be the case, and if it is, okay, we can use that data set. But it's not a problem. Like, we need to build good products that actually work, and that data set is not outdated by the time we do it.
Moving on, Google's AI model transparency principles are basically aimed at making AI models more transparent, to understand how they work, and ensure they're not used for malicious purposes. What's your take on that?
I would it's a bit tricky to evaluate this, because on one hand, principles are not effective; they do nothing, and it's a declaration that usually leads to nothing. Mm-hmm. So principles by themselves, I would say, have zero value, except for politically they declare something. But Google has done something. I don't know if it was because of the principles or not, but I heard that in the recent I/O conference, they announced a couple of products that produce images and video. And they have implemented their own proprietary watermark called SynthID into these foundational models. So that is a good step. I think that's definitely what needs to happen for both image, video, and language and audio. So all sorts of models. So I applaud them for doing this. The only downside is that they provide access to the watermark detection only to the users that have access to the original algorithm, which is a paid premium service that basically only several companies have. I think. Like, it's not so easy to get access to these algorithms. And likewise, you don't get access to the watermark detection. So on a societal level, it's really a minor, very few people get access to it, so the influence is minor. If they had made this really open to everyone, then it would be a different deal. And I think that's what should happen to really have a kind of more robust answer. So principles, no, but in this case, they have maybe led to a decent solution that needs to be more open.
So it's curious, because what you said that in case of Google and their new model, your ability to detect basically AI generated pictures only if you are pro and you have some kind of special subscription for professionals. So basically, it means that you must be pro if you don't want to be deceptive, in a way, if you will. Last but not least, Microsoft's lobbying to create laws and regulations against the malicious use of deepfakes.
Yeah, again, this lobbying in itself is not meaningful in the real world. So it's something that they do fine. I guess we can say it's better than doing nothing, but unless we see real results, it's kind of worthless, I think.
Moving on to your work in the AI ethics space, and you are known for your work on watermarking, which has been instrumental in basically shaping the conversation around AI ethics. Basically, your paper on the ethical need for watermarks based in LLM has preempted OpenAI's discussion about that, and even the European AI Act's requirement for watermarks in generative AI. So can you give us a before and after scene to illustrate how watermarking can transform AI ethics?
Yeah, so thanks for highlighting the importance of my work. I don't know if it really changed or revolutionized things, but I'll tell you the story of how the paper came together and what the aftermath was, and you can decide for yourself, I think. But we need to again go back in history and into the deep dark times of GPT-2. And not the trick, there was a trick GPT-2 that OpenAI has put on the arena, and it performed like super well and defeated all the other models. And for a joke, they call it GPT-2, and everyone was like, "What is it?" But no, it's now has become GPT 4.0, their newest model. But that's not what we're doing. We're talking about much more primitive GPT-2 transformer. So in these days, we were discussing this issue with my colleague Alexei Greenbaum, with whom we co-wrote this paper. And the issue we were discussing, and it's something that we take seriously in our lab, and it's been a focus for quite a while, it is the distinction between machine and human language. So we know, of course, the classic Turing test example where the goal is indistinguishability, and it's been for a long time the goal of producing machines that speak in an indistinguishable way from how humans speak. So that's been the technological goal for a long time. But now we are kind of close to or have achieved this. So we have the opposite problems. Now how can we tell them apart again? So that's what we call human-machine distinction. And in more general philosophical sense, machines have come to emulate two things that traditionally we associate with humanity. So one is the human face in a deepfake image is produced. They produce such realistic faces that we cannot really know that they're not human. And the human face is kind of very important, I think, for many reasons. But for example, we have Emmanuel Levinas, a famous philosopher of ethics, who said the seat, the essence of all ethics is kind of contained in the human face that looks at you and demands this dignity and demands the right to live and not to be lied to and all these things. So it's all in the face, and the face means that you have this humanity. So now that's been emulated by machines, and likewise with language, you have stories of rabbis making such realistic golems and sending them to other rabbis, and then they say, okay, let's speak now, and then they don't speak, and it's obvious they're not human because it's so difficult to emulate language. But the machines have mastered the human language right now. So all of these aspects, I think, really change the human condition. They change how we live because they demonstrate that these really very human things can be non-human, actually. They can be produced by non-human entities. And it concerns us, and I think if we lose this distinction completely, then we kind of also lose the ability to have this human condition we've had for so long. So we think we need to enforce it in some way. And we were thinking of ways to do it, especially in language. Okay, in images, they can have maybe a watermark or a disclaimer or a stamp that says deepfake or something. But with language is difficult. Also, there is this law in California that requires all chatbots to reveal before the conversation that they're not human. And the solution we know doesn't work because people relate to chatbots even knowing very well they're chatbots. There are people who have virtual partners, boyfriends, girlfriends, and so on, pets, that they know they're machines, they know they're apps, but they go on dates and they love each other and they live as a couple or more than a couple. I don't know. All kinds of things exist in this kind of language produced environment, and we can relate to them even though we know they're machines. So disclaimers, we thought, are not enough. They don't work. What needs to happen is that we need to mark this language of machines in some way that's detectable by humans, so we know they're not human language. And the archetypical kind of way we found is from this old fake, this proven theory that there is some secret script in the Bible that you can decode if you read every 24th or so letter of the original text, and then you will get a secret message. So there is a secret message, and the method that they use is called equidistant lettering or equidistant letters. So they are kind of at equal intervals, you get another letter that spell out some kind of phrase or a code or something. And the way this theory was disproven is not by saying there is no code or, it doesn't exist, but rather saying in any corpus of text that's large enough, you can find some distance of letters that will produce a meaningful message in the end. It's just a statistical fact, So we thought, why don't we do this for things like ChatGPT? ChatGPT didn't exist when we wrote this paper, but language models existed. And we thought, if a product like this comes along, why couldn't it produce text that every 20th letter would be an A, always an A, or something like that, that's detectable by humans. So you read a newspaper and you can say, this looks fishy. Is it human or not? Okay, let's count. Boom, boom, boom. I count it. I know. If it's a machine, I know. So this is the ideal case scenario because it's detectable by everybody. It's simple. Humans can read it. You don't need to go or log in or the Google's example. You don't need to be a premium customer to see that. That's what we wanted. That we thought is the best solution. Of course, we were aware of the limitations, and the limitations were that it's not robust at all. So if you change only a few letters, the whole message disappears. Even if you delete one small word, then suddenly this doesn't work anymore. And doesn't seem to be interoperable, which is something that's needed for watermarks. So it might work on some algorithms, but not all. And how do we get all of them to do that? So there were issues, but we wanted to put this message forward, that we want watermarks, why we want them, why they're important, and what they could look like ideally, so detectable by humans and so on. And we published this paper called The Ethical Need for Watermarks in machine-generated language or something like that. The ethical need for watermarks is the key phrase there. And afterwards, what followed is OpenAI's. People also revealed they were discussing watermarks in language. We had several very serious attempts to produce technically robust watermarks that are detectable, interoperable, and robust from editing. So even if you change the text, it still remains detectable. And that is very welcome because we knew our idea cannot be implemented. We knew our idea is just a concept, And what also happened is that watermarks now are required in the Article 52 of the AI Act. It's a long article, but it's part of it. Watermarks are part of it. And there is a recital 70A that talks specifically and in depth about watermarks in all generative models, so both language, video, sound, images, and so on. So I don't want to say this it happened because of our paper, but it happened after our paper, at least, after the draft of our paper. And of course, we've been advocating this to the European Commission. We've been talking with people and companies, and we continue to support this idea. I think it doesn't solve the problem in itself. Well, it doesn't solve all the problems, but at least it enforces this human-machine distinction, and something we believe, and I personally believe, is really necessary. And I hope this becomes an important part of how generative AI develops in the next years.
Well, first of all, that's an amazing job. And I would say that it's a very elegant way that you came up with to basically incorporate watermark into a text or corpus of a text without basically spoiling the outcome. Because for many people, when we say watermark, what we kind of an image of a picture with some kind of semi-transparent logo of copyright owner being in the center of it, simply making it unusable and pushing you to pay for something. So, but in your case, a watermark is something that is on one hand encrypted into the text, but on the other hand, could be easily recognized by humans, and in order to not to be fooled, as we just discovered.
Yeah, and non-intrusive, as you say, that's an important criterion too. Our method from the Bible theory was intrusive, so it changes the text because you need to have a specific word every 20 something letters and so on. So that changes the text. And modern watermarks, as you would read it, you would never know there is a watermark inside.
Here it could be a controversial question, I understand, but maybe you can name some potential positive uses for deepfakes technology. Or do you think is it inherently problematic and from ethical perspective, and there is nothing could be done to fix it?
I don't know. Ethically positive might be a term I don't really like, because it assumes that we can have this net profit or net loss after some action, and I think it's not as simple as that. But if you look at two main theories that could illuminate this, I think you either need to go into virtue theory, or you need to go do utilitarianism of some sort. Let's take some primitive utilitarian example of happiness overall, human happiness overall. So can we increase human happiness overall with deepfakes? Yeah, I can see that in some entertainment setting where you see extremely realistic depictions of Einstein or some figure, and we can really relate to them and learn. And let's say immersive, because it's not even an actor playing them. Or we go to some distant planet, or you go to Mars, and it's really Mars, and we don't need to film it in some desert, and it's really see Mars. So that could be interesting, although I would say it probably would get old pretty soon, and we get used to the realism of special effects, and then we want something even more real. And we know that in the end, even if the graphics are not perfect, what matters is the story and the characters and the dialogues. And so I don't know how realistic it is, but some of it would be fun. I think a good director would have a fun use for it. But that's a minor, compared to the negatives, I think that's a minor gain to have if you want to really compare the happiness overall. And the second approach, the Aristotelian approach, I think is more interesting, but at the same time more complicated, because it says in ethics, if you want a positive, you need to focus on your character. You need to build your courage, your friendship, how good of a friend you are, the pureness of your love, how do you commit, justice, and so on.
So let's move on.
Would
you like to add? Yeah.
In an Aristotelian sense, we need to focus, on our character to make things better. So ethically positive things would be if you're more brave, you have more courage, or you're a better friend, friendship as a virtue, or you're more loving, or you do more for justice to have more justice. So these sorts of things. So if you look at these things, they will not be improved by deepfakes themselves. Never. And none of the technological solutions by themselves, I think, lend themselves to these real virtues. What does lend to the virtues is how we use them, right? So we can use deepfakes for really terrible things, and that's what we usually talk about, because they are, they are kind of the most extreme examples of what can be done with deepfakes. But at the same time, maybe we can work to improve our resilience to them. We can improve on, why not, finding positive use cases Probably not for deepfakes, but for image generation, video generation. I don't think these are by themselves bad. So we can definitely use them to build better, characters. And from this perspective, I would add one thing, that it's really important, and more important than the technology itself, is to be, as a human, kind of on the right side of history, to be on the right on the right track. And that's what Aristotle says, you're never perfect and don't do everything right all the time. But if you are on the right side and you always kind of strive to perfect these virtues, you will have a fulfilled life. You will be happy at the end of the day, and you will have lived a good life. And these things are they're agnostic to technology. So we use technology in our lives, but whether we end up as good, virtuous people will depend more on our character than on technology. So I take this message from Aristotle quite seriously. I think deepfakes will not define us, but they will be part of our lives. And if we do it right, we will kind of make peace with them, and we can have still a good life, but that will depend on us, not technology by itself.
Very cool. And continuing on what you just said about deepfakes probably becoming just a part of our life, but not something that's going to define us. There is like a recent take from X, former Twitter, which is basically saying, deepfakes are just digital makeup. Truth always finds a way. So what's your take, Laurynas, on that? Are we crying wolf too soon? Basically, you almost answered that question, but still, in this particular regard.
Yeah, but I mean, Tim, what do you think? Are deepfakes like makeup?
No.
No, they're nothing like makeup. Of course, they're nothing like makeup. So imagine that's a few examples that I can come up with. Imagine out of nowhere, your face shows up in some protest with a flag you don't associate with, or in some event or a political party. Well, it's you standing there. Or imagine there is a video of you doing drugs. I know, Tim, you have 3 daughters and they see you doing drugs. How terrible.
Oh my God.
Sure you don't do that. Or you're on a body cam and some policeman is, you're drunk with a car, and then they're making you do all sorts of tests, and it's incriminating. These messages go to your boss, and they go to your job and your family. How is that like makeup? That's terrible.
Absolutely.
And I agree with the quote. They said, "Okay, truth prevails." Yeah, okay, truth prevails, but it's not without effort. It's not with doing nothing. So I would say, you said, "Oh, are we crying wolf too soon?" If we don't put effort in, we will be crying soon, I think. So I think the risks from deepfakes are definitely real, but we shouldn't let the technology kind of define our virtues, and we should still remain humans, take care of our character, and then face whatever comes from this technology with, prudence, with care for justice, with love, and all these virtues.
Well, you mentioned my daughters, and I appreciate that, because I think that my responsibility as a father is to teach my daughters skills that are necessary to be prepared and be able to navigate in the world full of deepfakes, making sure that these deepfakes don't define you, as you just said. And these conversations like this are so important for this particular mission. As we wrap up today's conversation, Laurynas, I'd like to pose one final question that bridges everything we've talked about. How would you define AI ethics? More importantly, why is it so critical for everyone, not just experts, to grapple with this concept as we move forward into the future?
Yeah, I think for sure this is relevant for everyone. You know, the risks I just mentioned, the scenarios they can happen to anybody because we have made this I don't know, decision or this it just happened. We were not thinking about it, and now we have these media platforms that have so many pictures of our face that and they are saved forever. There are, of course, GDPR requirements and so on. So you can request that it be deleted, but for sure there are already models of facial recognition which are not too far cry from image generation. So I think we already have our faces all over the internet, and then that can be used to produce a deepfake of us. That's just how it is. And now these risks become real for everybody. More than that, even if it's not something made of you, so a deepfake that's not made of you, but you are seeing it. That's another issue because you are being fooled. It is something that pretends to be one thing and you don't recognize it and you are being fooled. So I am as you mentioned, I'm a teacher. I teach at several schools and I teach to hundreds of students every year. Then I get their coursework that I need to evaluate and I need to kind of decide or guess whether it's been done by a machine or not. And to circumvent this problem, I address this at the start always, and I authorize the use of machines for one simple reason, that even if I forbid it and they use it, I will not be able to tell. So what's, what's if I cannot enforce this rule, why should I have it? That's the reason why I don't choose to have it. There are more reasons. I don't think we should pretend technology doesn't exist. I don't think that, let's not try to go back in time. It's not possible. So I think instead we should try to learn to live with it and to pretend it doesn't exist. But it is true that sometimes I think, wow, did the student write it? And there is no way for me to tell. And I'm sure there have been many times where I read something and just completely read it for their work, even though it wasn't. And I'm sure I have seen images on the internet. You remember that there was a Pope with a puffy jacket or something. And you would see it. Yeah. You can see it and you just, oh, cool. Okay, Pope with a jacket. And scroll through, and you would be fooled. And that's kind of, okay, funny and clever and who knows, then maybe harmless. You could argue it's harmless, but I don't think being fooled is harmless. Because it erodes this trust. At some point, there is nothing you can trust. And there is the biggest issue, which is that we cannot choose not to be fooled. There is nothing we can do to really know whether something is true or not. And, if it's an experiment and they manage to, convince us Pope was with a puffy jacket, that's okay. So you have a good model. It works well. That's all good. But for me, as a consumer, as a user, as a citizen, and all these things, I cannot do anything to not see this illusion. I cannot opt out of seeing these deceptions and being deceived. So I don't think there is even anyone that's on the internet, that has access to the internet, that hasn't been fooled by some text or image or video or something. And when there is no choice, I think it is really bad. And I think free society kind of relies on rational discourse, and rational discourse relies on some measure of truth. So if we let loose of that, I don't see how a free society can exist. If everything, every trust, every measure of trust and truth is eroded. So of course we are not there yet, and I think we shouldn't be panicking about it, but I want to highlight how the critical features, the features that allow us to distinguish synthetic content from human-produced content, how they're necessary for the society, for the people, the human condition, all sorts of things. So I want to encourage this very field to kind of develop it. If I can send this last message to the companies, the technical people in Israel and elsewhere, that if they have an opportunity, they should focus on this research. They should focus on producing detectors, watermarks, somehow unifying maybe standardizing how they're implemented. Something that is both, that can be easily implemented, easily detectable, and open to people. Not some paid service, premium service somewhere, but open to people that should have an option not to be fooled. So that's my key message for today.
That's a fascinating point. And I would like to thank you so much for joining us on this very thought-provoking journey. It was a fascinating discussion. I would also like to thank everyone who watched this video for joining us today. And remember that truth is out there. It's your choice and your decision not to be fooled.